Good morning, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the Mesa City Council meeting for February 28th. We're actually going to begin with not with a City Council meeting, but actually with an Eastmark CFD number 2 board meeting. And this is the first time we've done this particular meeting. The Eastmark number 2 CFD was recently created by the council and has 2 citizen members. So we're happy to welcome Sally Harrison and David Short, who are with us today. And we'll go ahead and begin the board meeting. Ms. Mickelson, have there been any requests to speak? Okay, thank you. The first item on our agenda for this meeting is to hear a presentation and discuss the purpose, structure, and governance for the Community Facilities District. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We appreciate being reminded of what we're doing here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good morning. My name is Mike Kennington. I'm the proposed district treasurer. With me is Zach Sakis, our outside counsel for the CFD, the Community Facilities District. Today we have several items, as Mr. Chairman said, that are to begin after the formation of the district. But before that, we'd like to kind of give an overview of the Community Facilities District and answer any questions you may have. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Zach.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Good morning, Chairman, Board. Pleasure to be here this morning. My name is Zach Sakis. I serve as Bond Counsel and Special District Counsel, both to Eastmark Community Facilities District number 1, Cadence Community Facilities District, and now Eastmark Community Facilities District number 2. This is the first district board meeting for Eastmark number 2. Some of the recent statutory changes, which we'll discuss herein, added 2 additional board members. And many people thought it couldn't be done, that they couldn't find space for 2 additional board members to sit with the existing council. So I'd like to congratulate Mesa for being so welcoming and warm and finding 2 seats. It can be done. In addition to having the pleasure of serving as counsel to the CFDs within Mesa, of the, let's call it 60 or so active CFDs throughout the state of Arizona that are levying taxes, I currently serve as counsel to approximately 30 to 35 of those. And so throughout today's about 10-minute CFD overview, I'll try to provide some unique highlights where maybe Mesa CFDs are a little bit different than other CFDs that I work with, if that'd be interesting to the board. What is a community facilities district? A community facilities district is a separate political subdivision and special taxing district established under Arizona law. It is separate from the city. It is not a component unit of the city. It is a self-supporting district, and city funds are not used for the CFD. It is essentially a city within a city with broad powers to tax, levy assessments, foreclose if necessary, sell debt, and then repay debt over time. Let's just see. Sure. At the outset of formation of Eastmark number 2, the City Council approved a development agreement that will be entered into by the city, the district, and the master developer of this district. And that establishes the rules of the road. And so on the next agenda item this morning, you'll be asked to consider that form of development agreement, which has been negotiated over the past year. And that outlines rules such as value to lien ratios, how the district will be governed, how the master developer will make contributions to pay for operations of the district until an O&M tax levy is sufficient for the district to be self-supporting. Next slide, please. Oh, this is good. What does a CFD finance? It is for public infrastructure. No part of what the CFD is financing is for private infrastructure that benefits solely private landowners. So roads, parks, other public amenities is what you're going to be financing. And so because you are a taxing authority, one of the things that we're all careful about in the governance of a district is going through the projects in a detailed manner and making sure that it is of a public nature. I would like to say that one thing that makes Mesa unique, and I'll read from the updated CFD policies and guidelines that the city adopted in December 2018 in light of the recent statutory amendments. In Mesa, so a CFD can just finance regular infrastructure. And in some municipalities that I work with, it's that sort of just standard that any developer would have to build for any regular subdivision. But within Mesa, the policies include a CFD plan must include regional public amenities, and it must be of a unique and high-quality nature, including design standards, architectural design, landscaping, and building materials. So Mesa, as a policy, and then both for this section of the table for Eastmark 1 and Cadence, and then the entire group for Eastmark number 2, you're looking at potentially projects. It's a special tool and it's a special opportunity for the districts to finance infrastructure. A CFD has three main financing tools and then one tool for ongoing operations and maintenance. General obligation bonds, special assessment revenue bonds, utility or other revenue source bonds, and then an ad valorem property tax to pay for operations and maintenance. Real quick, we're going to take revenue bonds off the table, as I do for most of the municipalities and CFDs I work with. Most municipalities have an existing utility service program, and they're not necessarily interested in another utility or being established within their service area. So for all three of the Mesa CFDs, there is no intent to issue revenue bonds backed by a new utility being formed by the CFD within those districts. So the items that you'll see will be general obligation bonds, special assessment revenue bonds, and for Eastmark 1 and Cadence, the O&M tax has already been approved. For the general obligation bonds and the O&M ad valorem tax, it requires an election. So one of the things you'll be asked to consider today, this being the first meeting of Eastmark number 2, is whether to call an election within the boundaries of Eastmark number 2 for voters to approve general obligation bond authorization and the ongoing property tax for operations and maintenance. As there are no registered voters living within Eastmark number 2, as certified by the county recorder, that election will be a landowner election. And so it's weighted by acreage. One thing that the CFD will consider is what are we financing? As I discussed previously, detailed analysis from district staff and with the board's governance that it's public infrastructure. One question, CFDs may provide bond financing upfront, which a developer then takes proceeds and constructs a project. That's called construction financing. Or the alternative is the developer takes the risk of construction, right? Maybe labor costs rise, materials costs rise during the construction period. And then once a project is done, then the CFD sells bonds and reimburses the developer for that infrastructure that's already completed. Within Mesa, again, I'll read to you from the updated policies. Unless otherwise agreed by the CFD board, all bond financings described herein shall be acquisition or reimbursement financings where the developer pays for public infrastructure and is subsequently reimbursed from CFD bond proceeds. So that's another thing, a little bit different. It's something I advise all my clients to do, and it takes an element of risk potentially off the table for the CFD to only finance infrastructure that's already been completed and accepted by the city. Next one. Oh, excuse me, I had one last. One other on the when was construction completed. Within the policies and guidelines, and I again encourage you to review these as part of your role on the board, we put restrictions in, and it's also in the development agreement. We don't want the CFD paying for old infrastructure. So in many cases, in 2005, 2006, 2007, prior to the recession, roads maybe were constructed and then development stalled out during the recession. And so what we've put in place is you don't want the CFD paying full price for infrastructure that's 10 years old and roads are cracked and aren't suitable. And so we have restrictions within the development agreement and within the policies that govern all three CFDs within Mesa, discussing what's appropriate to pay for and what's the timeline so that protecting residents and taxpayers that they're not paying for infrastructure that is no longer meeting the standards that would be appropriate. General obligation bonds are a full faith and credit pledge of secondary property taxes towards repayment of bonds. Within Eastmark number 2 and within all of the Mesa CFDs, you use a target tax rate. And so that limits the amount potentially of how much bonds can be sold. And it waits for the assessed value of the district to increase to an appropriate level before it takes on a debt burden for property owners and taxpayers. What you'll most likely see within Eastmark number 2 is the initial general obligation bond issuance will be very small. And that is to avoid sticker shock for residents so that as they move in initially in the district, the secondary property tax for GO bonds is already in place. And so that the first year that they're living, they don't have that, if that tax isn't there the first year and then second year it's levied, they don't get that, oh, why'd my property tax bill go up in that manner? And so the goal would be to do a small issuance up front, as the AV is small, right? Right now it's vacant land, so as homes are constructed, the assessed value increases within the district. But that first issuance will be small, and then from there on, as the assessed value increases, you'll see the bond issues potentially grow. Special assessment revenue bonds are the next tool that you'll see most commonly used by all three Mesa CFDs. It is secured by the real property, and it's an assessment per lot. So typically, as you've seen in Eastmark number 1, somewhere between $2,000 per residential lot or to $3,500 per residential lot. That is an assessment lien that runs with the land. So unlike a mortgage, which is a loan to you as an individual, where you then provide real property as collateral, and then if you were to sell your house, you pay off that mortgage, and the new owner takes on a separate mortgage. The special assessment lien runs with the land. So if the average person lives in a house for about 7 years. So if the first property owner, let's say you have a $2,000 assessment, lives there about 7 to 10 years and they pay off about $1,000 of that assessment, the subsequent owner would not, the clock doesn't restart at the full $2,000 for them. So that subsequent owner, the remaining balance of the unpaid principal balance of the assessment would still just be that $1,000. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. Next one. As I mentioned recently, in 2017 and 2018, there were some statutory changes that had a variety of changes, but the one that we'll talk about the most is the board composition. I had the opportunity in 2018, after the 2017 bill, there were some technical deficiencies in that bill, and I was called upon to help draft the technical corrections bill in 2018. Unlike the typical boards that the city council otherwise, the Board of Adjustment, where city council has full discretion on appointing citizens, the board composition for a CFD is a little bit different. And so under the statutory revisions from 2017, the largest private landowner designates the process for appointing our 2 additional board members, as well as city council sitting ex officio. And so that part, in the application process for Eastmark number 2, the master developer provided a process for both designating initially the 2 additional board members, and then on an ongoing basis for how their subsequent board members might be appointed. Eventually, when the master developer has completed construction, the master developer will deliver a certificate to the district saying they're done, and at that point there's a transition to the homeowners association. This is in the development agreement, in the developer's application. The homeowners association will take responsibility for appointing the 2 additional board members. And so that is a best practices that I've suggested to many of my clients, because you end up with a situation where people living within the district potentially can sit on the board and have a voice regarding taxation of their property. Next one, thank you. The one thing I would say—
I'm sorry, do you mind if we go back to that point? Because
Sure.
obviously we've populated this board with individuals that do not live in the district. None of us do. Nobody does, frankly, at this point. So once that changes and there are individuals living in the district, do we need to repopulate this board with people who live there, or is that just an option? Or
Great question, Chairman. Thank you for bringing that up. No, so mayor and council ex officio will remain members of the board and will continue. The statutory changes were only going forward. So Eastmark 1 and Cadence will continue to be just mayor and council sitting ex officio as the board, with obviously your role as mayor and council. You represent the interests of Mesa and the landowners within those districts. And then for Eastmark 2, only those 2 seats potentially will change for the designation process in the future once the developer has certified that they're complete with development, and that's when that transition point will happen.
So that's optional. It's not mandatory that those seats be occupied by individuals that live in the district, but they're not precluded.
The process that the landowner designated was for the HOA to set forth those 2 members.
Oh, okay, so they'll be nominated by the HOA.
Right. So it will continue. So the process it will never revert back to similar cities and city boards where city council has full discretion to appoint those members. The process outlined in the development agreement and from the original landowner will continue in perpetuity for the life of the district.
Thank you.
One part of the statutory change, which you just touched on, is that developer process will continue to control, right? Very quickly within Eastmark number 2, because the Eastmark development generally is one of the best-selling communities in America right now, home builders are already starting to purchase land from the master developer within Eastmark number 2, and very shortly the master developer will no longer be the largest private landowner. But nevertheless, the process that master developer designated for appointing the 2 additional board members will continue to control throughout. This one's a quick summary slide of the different options following the statutory changes. And so the most important step following those recent statutory changes was to update the CFD policies and guidelines for all 3 districts, which Mesa completed in December of 2018. Again, please review them at your leisure and be familiar with them. In addition, I wanted to make sure you were aware in 2016, there were also some statutory changes that facilitated the refunding of special assessment revenue bonds. None of the bonds obviously Eastmark number 2 has not sold bonds, Cadence has not sold bonds yet. Eastmark number 1, none of the bonds are seasoned enough yet to potentially be eligible to refinance. But this is just a little preview of what may be coming, depending on interest rates and other things that the district's financial advisors provide. There may be opportunities, and you'll start to see refunding opportunities where you can lower bond interest rates and then potentially the tax levies or potentially reduce the tax obligations for residents within the districts. In addition to the board governance, what does district staff do all day? There's a variety of other ongoing operations, day-to-day things to keep these districts running. Budget law compliance, most likely for this board, other than formation items, the next thing that you'll be considering coming up in the next few months will be annual budget compliance and approval. Reviewing estimated tax values. You can go to the next one, thank you. Likewise, assessment district management. The Eastmark 1 and Cadence, and most likely when it comes time, Eastmark number 2, will have the county treasurer collect the assessments and property taxes for payment of the bonds, managing assessment prepayments, bond calls, modifications of plats. Again, for special assessment revenue bonds, the board needs to keep in mind that the real property is the ultimate security for those bonds. And so if a developer comes in and replats or changes how things are laid out within an area that's assessed, we have to then go and modify the legal descriptions of the land securing those bonds. And then likewise, my friend to the right here manages bond debt service, works with trustees, bond registrars, paying agents, coordinates timing issues with respect to when the county collects property tax revenues and assessments and then transfers them to the district to make sure that all matches up to ensure bond investors are able to get paid on time. Friendly reminder, because we're financing public infrastructure within the district and because each CFD is a political subdivision, it's able to sell debt at tax-exempt interest rates. So the investors in the bonds of the CFDs are willing to accept a lower interest rate return on their bonds because they don't pay federal income taxes, and depending on their domicile in what state. If they live in Arizona, they also don't pay Arizona income taxes on it. And so because those investors are receiving a federal subsidy, there's additional tax law compliance matters, ongoing securities offering compliance matters, and that's all addressed that you've seen in Eastmark 1 bond offerings. And with that, did I go over 10 minutes? I apologize.
Thank you very much. Mr. Freeman has a question. Go ahead.
Mr. Sakis, just for my information, and this is kind of new to me, but I understand it more and more after me with Mr. Kennington. If for some reason we're in a recession, none of the land is selling, who's liable for all the bond debt for this property? The CFD itself, or the city, or whom?
Chairman, Board Member Freeman, great question. So it depends. It doesn't depend who owes for the debt. It depends what type of debt. So if it's a general obligation bond debt, again, there's a full faith and credit pledge where the district will levy the taxes necessary to pay debt service on those bonds. So in that situation you named, if the assessed value within the district is shrinking, the amount of debt the levy will remain the same to pay debt service, but from a proportionate basis, it may change from what it looks like to the taxpayer. On the alternative, special assessment revenue bonds, that's where the real property is the ultimate security for repayment of those bonds. And so if payment was to stop from a property owner, then there is an accelerated foreclosure process that can be exercised where the land would be sold. Proceeds from that sale of land would then go to pay bondholders. At no point is city general fund exposed, and at no point is there any sort of CFD general, there is no CFD general fund that would have to step in and purchase the land. The city's under no obligation to purchase the land in that situation, and likewise the CFD is not either. In each transaction, conservatively, with district staff and district financial advisor guidance, there are reserve funds established in the event of market fluctuations to smooth out that process and ensure that no bond payments are missed to investors.
Mr. Thompson.
Michael, we're not actually issuing the bond debt until the utilities or the infrastructure's in place, and then we accept that into the city. For example, once the streets are done, the utilities are installed, the street lights are in, the landscaping's done, we accept all that. We go out and inspect it, and once we accept it, then we issue the debt and pay back the developer, correct?
That's correct, Chairman and Board Member Thompson. That is, as Zach had mentioned earlier, we're on a reimbursement basis. So as you're correct in saying that we accept the infrastructure first, our engineering department, and then we reimburse after. And it takes the risk off the table from the district.
Okay.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
Mayor,
Yes.
so if I could just
Jim.
also add to Councilmember Vice Mayor Freeman's question, to just put some context on the special assessment district bonds. The current ones, I think the largest number we have is 3,500 on any lot, so it's a very modest amount. So as far as when you look at sort of the debt and whether a recession occurs, the most of it that it's ever on the special assessment side is 3,500 per lot.
Hey, Mayor. So why are we doing this? Why would we allow for these to be created? It's a special, I guess, almost dispensation that we allow for this in certain parts of the city. It obviously takes a property owner, a developer who controls a significant amount of property for this to really make sense to set this up. There's significant amount of resources, city resources that go to stand this up from city staff perspective. The effort it takes for us to monitor, to establish both the legal process, to establish budgets, to review projects, to make sure they're completed, they met the quality and standard that we would expect. But this is a tool that allows development to find another creative way of financing projects, to reimburse them for the capital projects they've invested into. We expect, as part of this, that these public infrastructure are significant amenities that it creates on itself. These amenities also add value to the development, so we're always looking after that. So there's often kind of a push and pull with staff pushing the developer to, with this special financing that they demonstrate that they're not only providing the basic needs of infrastructure, but they're also providing a higher quality of infrastructure. To put in context, though, and Councilmember Thompson is very much aware of this, the sensitivity we have as we look at it, looking after the citizens and residents of Mesa who have yet to move into these neighborhoods, or even the ones that are living there, is the cost impact to them. You know, this is a real cost impact. So instead of the cost being embedded in their mortgage, which would have been embedded in the cost of land, because that's typically where a lot of the infrastructure, before you move into a home, that's already embedded into that cost of land. They're now going to be paying they're going to see it on their tax bill, right? This assessment. Today, all residents in Mesa, our rate that we currently at our secondary property tax, the rate is about a little over $1, okay? You saw in a slide earlier that assessment maxes out here at is it 385?
For secondary property taxes, the target tax rate is 385. In addition, there's the operations tax,
So
which is
another-
30 cents per hundred.
So that's on
415.
top of, so think about the average resident in Mesa is paying that $1 or $2 or whatever on their assessment. And if you live in a CFD, you pay that plus, what, 415? 415. So there's at least when you're looking at your tax bill, if someone living inside a CFD compares their tax bill to someone living across the street, it's a significant difference. And yet, that's the cost of living inside a CFD and those amenities, and hopefully they see the value of that. But that's the sensitivity, because Councilmember Thompson knows sometimes people don't recognize that when they're first closing on their property, or maybe it's the second property owner or whatever. So we're oftentimes, as a city staff, trying to be very sensitive to try to be very clear and make sure that is well-known and communicated to residents in those areas. But it is a challenge sometimes, as you can imagine, for residents sometimes when they see that bill, because that's a pretty high tax bill relative, and yet it's not the city of Mesa driving that. Now, I will say, when we get our CAFR, while it's not a direct liability to the city, it is, I think they refer to it as like overlapping debt. I'm not sure, but it does get disclosed, and it does show up in our CAFR as part of our total debt and gets calculated into certain ratios. So while we sit here today and say, well, the rest of the residents of Mesa wouldn't have to pay for it, the city wouldn't be levying another secondary property tax, but it does get disclosed and shows up on our annual statements as another existing debt that's out there. So just kind of share those with you.
Well, that provokes a couple of questions. So what, is it incumbent on us, we all want to be good board members, right? So when the next time we have a meeting and we're actually approving debt or approving assessments, is it incumbent on us to say, well, please demonstrate to us that these are for improvements that are above and beyond, the ordinary asphalt and gutter that everybody else in the city gets? For us to approve this, you need to show to us that you've met the requirement of this being in addition to.
I think it's the totality of all the improvements. I mean, not the street, but it's maybe the design of the street or the amenities, streetscapes part of the streets and things like the monument, the entryways and the landscaping. They have probably a few more palm trees than we would normally put in a R.J. Zeter's landscaping design for, median. So it's a little bit different.
So I'm aware that at the staff level, those questions are being asked, and you're scrutinizing.
Yeah, but I think maybe, especially when you begin, and this is the first time a meeting of CFD number 2, sorry. Yeah. Maybe one of the things we could do at one point is you could have the visuals of seeing what the proposal is, so you could be assured that this is, that entirety is the entire package showing what that might look like. And is a quality, and we, I know we have the developer sitting here, but that's why we push them on not just the public space, but we also say then we expect the types of development to be at a significant quality and be attracting a certain market that we think should be unique for Mesa. It shouldn't always just be like anything else we see in Mesa, because they have this benefit of providing this unique way of financing public improvements.
And so I guess I'm speaking more to myself, to remind myself that when we have these issues before us, I think it's incumbent on us to say, okay, please remind us why this qualifies. What is it about this project that that makes it special so that it qualifies for CFD reimbursement? That would be an appropriate inquiry, I assume, right? Next, you talked about the sticker shock that sometimes folks who live in these neighborhoods experience when they get their assessment. A lot of times when we're selling new homes that have things that perhaps aren't obvious about the homes that we want the homeowners to understand, like they live underneath an airport or they live next to something that's dangerous, there's specific notice requirements. When I'm sitting down in this district buying this home, does the real estate salesman give me any warning that I'm paying a higher rate?
Chairman Giles, absolutely. There's a variety of disclosures and notices that go into a closing package when a potential retail purchaser is interested in buying a home within any of the Mesa CFDs. And the obligation is intended to be ongoing for the subsequent owners as well. So when that first owner sells to the next owner, even if that next owner, right, isn't buying from a builder, they still should be receiving the notices and disclosures of the property taxes, the assessment if it's still in place, and just generally that they're purchasing within a community facilities district.
Okay.
And Chairman Giles, an example of that is in the packet, the financing, the development agreement. If you look at Exhibit E, just afterwards, if you would like to review that, that's an example of the disclosure statement that is provided to the potential buyers.
Okay, thank you. Last question, and Mr. Brady pointed out that you pointed out that we're not a backstop financially for the district. If something goes horribly south financially with this district, and by we, I mean that other entity that we represent, the city of Mesa, there's no piercing through to the city to be responsible for this debt. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Then again, I guess I'm kind of like Mr. Brady, a little dumbfounded why on our CAFR where it reflects negatively on our financial position.
And I'll answer that, Chairman Giles. Per accounting reporting rules, if the governing body is made up, the majority of the governing body made up of city council members, the same members of the city council, then you have to report it as a component unit on the CAFR. And so as Zach said, it's a separate legal unit, but for accounting reporting rules, it needs to be included.
Yeah. Okay, I know that's the rule, I just don't understand why that's the rule, because it seems like if we're not under any circumstances responsible for that debt, why is it tacked onto our balance sheet? But those are the rules. Okay, thank you. We do have an agenda item, an action item. Are there any other questions or, yes, Jeremy?
Is the debt revolving, or is it just to build out the initial infrastructure and eventually it will like sunset and disappear?
Yeah, so Chairman Giles and Board Member Whitaker, the authorization is provided for infrastructure, and there's, as Zach said, there's a 10-year window for them to construct it and to be reimbursed after the fact. So theoretically at build out, without any infrastructure being built, there wouldn't be any need to issue debt. However, I don't, and Zach could correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if there's any limit for them using the authorization.
So the developer, the election that you'll consider on the next agenda item is for a $70 million of general obligation bond authorization to be used over time. Once that authorization is used, right, so first issuance, let's say, is $5 million. There's only $65 million of bond authorization left. Once they use it and repay it, it doesn't fill back up to that $70 million. You could always call another additional election for more general obligation bonding authority in the future, but it's not revolving, I think, to your question, Board Member Whitaker.
So once the infrastructure is fully built out, inevitably at some point in time, whether it's decades away, we should not anticipate having to keep replenishing the bonds, right? I mean, it's just to simply build it out. Once every piece of land is built out in this area, ideally, we just, that ends, right? Or would capital improvements in the future come back for more bond debt in that specific area?
Well, and Mike and Zach, I mean, at that point, you don't have a master developer property owner who kind of controls, the projects and putting the infrastructure. Now it's divided up among the HOA. I mean, even just from a logistics standpoint, that would be complicated. I mean, could the HOA in the future, after the build out, come back and offer additional projects to be done?
I would imagine so. It would just take another election or another authorization, approval of an authorization of another amount.
Typically, at formation, the general obligation bond authorization is anticipated that there will not be a subsequent election to ask for more authority. I can't project what, I can't anticipate or project
The day the
what would happen
election
in the
takes
future.
place, there's typically how many votes?
Well, in this case, because they've already sold some land to a few home builders, there will be 6 votes representing
And
all
that's
the
a lot
landowners.
for a typical
Yeah,
district.
usually it's one landowner that controls everything too.
So the ability to go, I guess, subsequent after it's built out, now you've got to have the entire district of, I don't know, how many different property owners would have to come together and agree to do something
Got
like
it.
this.
Okay. And the other question I have is I know that we're talking about forming this new board. At some point, will the other boards be filled by members of those individual communities so that we don't have an obligation to sit on those boards? Or in perpetuity, will we always be the acting board members for the existing communities?
Chairman Giles, Board Member Whitaker, for the existing Eastmark number 1 and Cadence CFD, those were formed prior to the statutory changes in 2017 and 2018. And for those 2 boards, mayor and council will continue to sit ex officio as the board of those 2 districts in perpetuity.
And the new one will also always be the board members plus 2 from the community, so it always will be a 9-person.
Correct.
board. Okay, thank you, guys.
Thank you. Any other questions before we take action? All right, let me read then the resolution because it is, I'm sure Zach spent a lot of time writing this, so we're going to get it correct. Okay.
It's poetry, my friend.
Thank you. Maybe we should have music in the background already. The action item is a resolution appointing district officers, approving the general plan, taking certain other actions with regard to organization of the district, calling a special bond and operation and maintenance tax election for the district, and entering into a development, financing, participation waiver, and intergovernmental agreement with the City of Mesa and the landowners of the real property within the boundaries of Eastmark Community Facilities District Number 2. Is there a motion to approve that? Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. That passes unanimously. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Thank you. And a second? Second. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you for your community service.
Thanks for your contribution.
To the Eastmark Community Facilities District Number 2. We appreciate it. We will now then begin our city council